Childlike fantastical wonder is often disassociated from the calamity of war. However, when the two genres are intertwined, how do the realities of both realms become warped? Through the historical fantasy genre, new perspectives on the past are brought into light and thus individually valued across generations. Sarah K. Hers explains that a piece of historical fantasy allows audiences to understand history as a human experience rather than a series of isolated events. As aging populations become accustomed to global devastation caused by 24/7 communication, humanity begins to diminish as a result of compassion fatigue, which turns horrifying tragedies into everyday occurrences. This is why the relation of rather unpleasant events to mythical realms and nostalgic purity is a breath of fresh air to audiences. And while at face value the conceptual elements seem shallow, they serve as underlying metaphors for global issues. Two films which utilize this combined genre are Andrew Adamson's The Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, and Guillermo del Toro's Pan's Labyrinth. In media res, the opening shots of Narnia suggest that it takes place in the 1940s in London during World War II. Depicted as the Nazi airstrike group Luftwaffe and their bombing of England known as the Blitzkrieg. The resulting instability and shortage of rations leads Britain to evacuate 400,000 children from urban to rural areas. This unveils the economic and social deprivation that really existed in their cities. Similar to much of the youth during this time, the Pevensey children are forced to experience the wonders and bores of countryside living as they are sent to an extravagant stranger's home. However, the presence of hostility continues to loom over them and therefore cannot be independent from their fabricated realm of Narnia. Pan's Labyrinth takes place during the summer of 1944, in the aftermath of both the Spanish Civil War and World War II. Similarly, it is set in a rural encampment near Madrid, which the main character must move to from her urban home to avoid the backlash of the fascist and Nazi-supported Falangist victory, resulting in great loss of life, much human suffering, disruption of the society and the economy, distortion and repression in cultural affairs, and truncation of the country's political development. Franco's regime completely destroyed an entire country to create a new visionary one. Though the main focus of the film is on the protagonist, Ophelia, navigating her nightmarish fantasies, the simultaneous bloodshed of the guerrilla warfare from the dying nationalist party creates parallels, showing wartime struggle through the eyes of the youth. Despite taking place in dissimilar periods in the 1940s, the two films prove to be comparable through the historical fantasy genre. In both, the plots follow youthful protagonists experiencing adolescent struggles while living in the midst of war. As they cope with the horrors of reality in fictitious realms, the characters find that their jubilant fantasies are also not immune to bloodshed. And while they attempt to take on adult roles by aiding in imaginary wars, in reality their endeavors are fruitless. Contrastingly, the varying cultural standpoints must be considered in analysis, being American and Spanish. The film's usage of fantastical parallels, children being disadvantaged by their own curiosities, and the desire to be a hero represent the harsh realities of youth coming into their own while simultaneously living in a world of ruin. Narnia and Pan's Labyrinth utilize lighting, costuming, and CGI to convey the parallels between worlds and demonstrate how the trauma of war bleeds into the innocence of imagination. To portray the tone of the opening Luftwaffe airstrike, the lighting is low-key, corresponding to the grim outlook of the war. Only the explosions of bombs provide warm tones, exemplifying how in obscurity, suffering is universally understood. Opposing this is the high-key lighting during the entrance to Narnia. Despite setting an optimistic tone, the overall bright surroundings serve only to deceive the children, similar to the widespread propaganda of World War II. On the other hand, Pan's Labyrinth opens to the high-key lighting of a gorgeous spring day, representing the fraudulent utopia fabricated by Franco at the conclusion of the Civil War. Additionally, the lighting gives the illusion that fascist Captain Fidel and his armies are favorable. Consequently, in Ophelia's entrance to the labyrinth, the lighting is low-key, symbolizing the nightmarish truth of the Falangist party that she discovers through her fantasies. Ophelia, being forced to sleep mere meters away from constant combat, is unable to escape the horrific mindset. Therefore, unlike Narnia, her imagination is corrupt in its entirety. Because the Pevensey children have a strong grasp on who is malevolent in their experiences with war, their manifestations of villains are conventional and clear-cut. Despite originally being clad in deceiving white clothing, the witch's wardrobe later lines up with that of a stereotypical villain, wearing jagged black designs or even the pelt of her enemy. Additionally, a more dark saturation and depictions of vile, gross, and subhumane creatures characterize the enemy army. The disgusting portrayal of the antagonist parallels the children's deep-rooted hatred of the Nazi Party, formed by a combination of propaganda and first-hand experiences. Opposingly, the fantastical creatures that Ophelia interacts with are rather ambiguous. The fairies are colorful, yet not vibrant, neutral. Additionally, their teeth, ears, and wings are all sharp, indicating a sort of danger about them. Similarly, Alfano, emerging from the shadows in dark brown hues draped in moss with long dagger-like fingers, is conventionally frightening. Despite his supposed good intentions, Alfano's appearance and that of his henchmen is unsettling and untrustworthy, more closely resembling the stature of a nightmare. Because her mother marries a fascist, violent, and villainous man, while a deemed traitor cares for her, Ophelia's understanding of morality is completely skewed, thus reflecting in her imagination. The disadvantage of childlike wonder is apparent in both films through their usage of cinematography and biblical allusions. Shallow-focus medium shots are constantly utilized to portray the looming threats that are often ignored by the youthful protagonists. With their backs turned, they are unaware of the dangers until it is too late, thus becoming victim to an innocent perspective that presumes they are invincible. Additionally, the proportions of the grand villain's lairs with the minuscule children demonstrate the blatant disregard of warning signs that comes from unscathed hubris. A variation of slight high and low angle shots is also used to convey how the children are unsuspecting of the intentions of the antagonists. The children are convinced that they are of the utmost importance, yet the camera angles often portray the antagonist with high angle shots and not them, showing that with bribery and childlike impulse to obey, the protagonist's false superiority plays right into the hands of the enemy. As a reference to Eve's consumption of the forbidden fruit, both Edmund and Ophelia eat food provided to them by antagonistic characters. Despite growing up in the trauma of war, the two children, being no older than 10, remain to have unbridled faith in their judgment of situations, which proves to be a major weakness. As they partake in the sweets, a toxic bond is created, and an assumption of debt forces them to obey Alfano and the witch. In the case of Pan's Labyrinth, director Del Toro states that the pale man who offers the food represents fascism, and the church eating the children when they have a perversely abundant banquet in front of them. There is almost a hunger to eat innocence, a hunger to eat purity. The antagonists utilize the deprived children left starving from real-life affairs to feed their own desires. Additionally, a biblical allusion is used in the death of Ophelia. As the bird's-eye view shot pans out, Ophelia's body positioning is extremely similar to that of Adam in the creation of Adam. This replication serves as an antithesis of the original message, the birth of man, more so symbolizing the death of humanity, demonstrating how there is no innocence in war, a message prevalent in both films. The final point of comparison, a child's want to be the hero, is portrayed in both films through mise-en-scène and their decisions to partake in the imaginary wars. In Narnia, wide shots are used to display the vast scenery of the war grounds. There is little negative space as it is full of creatures in combat. Edmund and Peter are constantly found fighting in the center of the shots, representing how despite this being a 100-year war for the people of Narnia, the two boys still feel as though they are integral pieces. This stems from the guilt of being too young to aid in the bloodshed of their home realm. As they've seen their cities destroyed, their mom mentally broken, and their dad sent away to fight, there is a sense of futility, which can only be rivaled with a fairy tale-esque ending where they save the day. As the children return to reality where virtually no time has passed, still being stuck in the horrors of the 1940s, the children must realize that the successes of the imaginative wars are mere projections of their true desires. And rather than having to come to that very real adult consciousness, the Pevensey children cope through their hopes that they will someday return to their fantasy. In the conclusion of Pan's Labyrinth, Ophelia is faced with a moral dilemma, to either sacrifice her brother and live with immortality, or not and die immortal. Uncomfortable with Fauno's dubious demand, she turns down the offer.
He sido humillada, ignorada.
As Vidal stumbles into view, he sees Ophelia talking to nothingness. She had fabricated Alfano and his tasks as a way to feel important after being constantly pushed aside in her own life. Unfortunately, the decision of declining Alfano's offer puts Ophelia in an extremely vulnerable position, where she is shot and killed. As Mercedes sings Ophelia her final lullaby, the set completely changes. In high-key lighting, royal red, and copious amounts of gold, Ophelia enters her afterlife, which seems to stem from her good deed of rescuing her brother. While the story begins to conclude with a happy ending, audiences are jolted back to the realities of the low-key lighting and neutral costumes, where Mercedes cries over the bloody child. The reality of futility corresponds to the thousands of young men persuaded to fight through propaganda who are treated as expendables in an adult war. Ultimately, the two films are able to use the historical fantasy genre to portray innocence in war times despite their varying cultural contexts. With fantastical parallels, a display of weaknesses and childlike wonder, and the youth strives to be the heroes in their own stories, both Narnia and Pan's Labyrinth portray how children use their imaginations to navigate the recurring tragedies of a broken world.